sometimes getting that thyroid corrected is the missing link into someone really feeling good. One example, I can remember a lady I worked with for several months. We got her hormones dialed in and her thyroid levels, they were normal, but she still had all the symptoms. So I treated her based on her symptoms, not what her lab numbers showed. And within a few weeks, she calls me back and she goes, oh my gosh, this was the missing link. That's what really made the difference.
Welcome to Look Good, Feel Good with Matt and Amy McKinley, the podcast where we bring you expert advice and honest, real talk on health, wellness, and feeling your absolute best. From hormone optimization to aesthetics and everything in between, we're here to help you live your best life. Let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about thyroid. And, you know, we're incredibly passionate about thyroid and thyroid dysfunction. And because honestly, most doctors, you know, they miss the mark on when it comes to thyroid.
Yeah, in learning about thyroid recently, what we've learned in advanced training is we really did miss the mark in the way we were taught in school. We were basically taught to look at what's called a TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. But you really need to do a complete panel to see what the thyroid is doing, not just one test, because one test will give you this much information as opposed to about 3 or 4 markers, which can give you a lot more information.
Yeah. So today we're going to break down what your labs really mean, you know, why symptoms matter more than numbers, and how optimizing your thyroid really could be the energy breakthrough that you've been waiting for. So let's talk labs and numbers.
Okay, we'll talk labs. So we get a panel that shows a TSH, a T4, and a T3. So to break this down, TSH is a signal the brain gives to the thyroid to make thyroid, but it really doesn't tell us how well or if our thyroid is converting what needs to be made into the active metabolite. Sorry, that sounded really long there.
So how I explain it, and I don't mean to interrupt you, honey, but
that's okay. I'm used to it.
Anyways, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism back in my 30s.
Believe me, she definitely had it.
Anyway, some of the symptoms I was having, and not everyone has these, but looking back, I recognize this, you know, now as I know more about thyroid, but I was having double vision, and double vision usually isn't a sign of hypothyroidism. However, I was so severely hypothyroid because I wasn't making any. So my pituitary gland, so it sits right between your eyeballs here. And it basically tells your thyroid, hey, make more thyroid.
I thought that's your nose that sits between your...
right here.
Oh, okay, deeper.
Eyes.
Got it.
And so what happens is your thyroid releases T4. T4 actually is inactive thyroid. It circulates through your bloodstream. It actually transitions into T3 in the liver. And that is what your mitochondria use as energy. So when you think about it, I have an autoimmune disease. Hashimoto's is actually, it's a kind of a buzzwords out there, Hashimoto's.
Or hypothyroidism.
Yeah. And the majority of autoimmune disorders is Hashimoto's. So we kind of throw that word around a lot. People are like, I have Hashimoto's. Well, Hashimoto's is really, truly autoimmune disease and your thyroid is not working. However, T3 is what we should be looking at and should be monitoring because it is the active part of thyroid that your mitochondria use for energy.
Yeah, so, you know, going back to what we started earlier, we were really taught not to pay too much attention to T3, but more to the TSH and maybe T4. But it's very inaccurate. T3 is the active metabolite or the active thyroid that the body uses that will help fuel energy, metabolism, temperature regulation. Believe me, that's a big one. Amy would put her cold feet on me every night. They never seemed to warm up. But so I lived through it while she was living with it.
So it's interesting how there's different types of thyroid too. We kind of talk a little bit about what kind of different thyroids there are. In medicine, we have the ability to make T4, which a lot of people recognize as synthroid or levothyroxine. And I was on that for years because that's all I knew. The other portion we're able to make is T3, which is cytomel or liothyronine. So we know how to make those pharmaceutically. However, there is a more natural thyroid that mimics more of our thyroid, which is kind of interesting, made from pigs have the same thyroid we do. And so they've desiccated it or dried up the thyroid to make it more of a natural thyroid. So over the years, I actually had switched myself over to more of a natural thyroid, but it took some time, kind of regulating that.
She didn't know better. That's the way we were taught. And so she lived with probably suboptimal levels for a long time.
And it took a little while for me to kind of switch over to more of that natural thyroid, but I was able to do it and I feel great. The one thing about thyroid that isn't discussed, there's other receptors that we don't know how to make pharmaceutically. We don't know how to make T1, we don't know how to make T2, because in reality, there's a T1 receptor, a T2 receptor, a T3 receptor, and a T4 receptor. And NP thyroid or armor thyroid, more of a natural thyroid, we're able to mimic that more naturally like ours. T1 is more iodine, T2 is more metabolites that we just don't know exactly what they are, but we know they're important to our body. However, NP thyroid, armor thyroid have the ability to do that. So anyway, that's what I've transitioned to.
And a lot of times we'll see patients that come in with, quote, normal thyroid on paper, right? Mm-hmm. So what we've learned to do, which I think is, gosh, I've seen a lot of examples, and sometimes getting that thyroid corrected is the missing link into someone really feeling good, as far as energy, brain fog, temperature regulation, and even just overall wellness. I've had one example. I can remember a lady I worked with for several months. We got her hormones dialed in and her thyroid levels, they were normal, but she still had all the symptoms. So I treated her based on her symptoms, not what her lab numbers showed. And within a few weeks, she calls me back and she goes, oh my gosh, this was the missing link. That's what really made the difference. And now guess what? Her T3 is high, but she's feeling phenomenal. Yeah. So we got to remember, we're like snowflakes. We're all different. So we want to optimize thyroid, not just make it look good on paper.
Yeah. So I tell a lot of my patients too, I say, listen, your thyroid looks normal. It's within range. However, you might feel good on a little thyroid. And I don't know until we give it to you and we see how you feel. There's a good story out there that I kind of tell some of my patients about the doctor we kind of work with. He talks about how he was working in the emergency room and he had a nurse that she was hypothyroidism and she was on some medication. Her doctor was out of town, and so she asked the doctor if he would refill her medication. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll refill your Synthroid. And she's like,
yeah, but only one time. This is all I'll do.
Well, she goes, no. I don't take that Synthroid stuff. I take that Armor or NP thyroid. That's what I take. And he's like, no. You need to be on Synthroid. She's like, no. It doesn't work for me. I don't feel great on it. So he's like, oh, whatever. So he wrote her the prescription for NP thyroid. And anyway, a couple weeks later, another nurse walks into his office and says, hey, can you prescribe me some of that thyroid that Barbara has? And she said, ask your doctor to prescribe you for it. And she goes, well, my doctor won't give it to me. He says my labs are normal. And he goes, how do you know it makes you feel better? She goes, well, Barbara gave me some of the thyroid and it made me feel so much better. And he was like, what? So he calls Barbara into his office. Barbara, why did you give her your thyroid? She goes, well, you know what? I felt better. She had the same symptoms I did. I gave her a little bit of my thyroid, and guess what? She feels better too. He kind of made a correlation saying, you know what? I wasn't listening to my patients because I was the expert on thyroid, and your thyroid's within normal limits. So why do you need to go on thyroid medication? But he wasn't listening to his patients. And I thought that's very, very interesting. We should be listening to our patients when they're telling us something. We need to be listening to them. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and it's all about, and this is what we base everything we do off of, but it's personalization. Personalize the treatment to the patient, not to a lab number. Well, let me tell you my story. So after we got going in this, I thought, I'm going to try some thyroid, right? Because, well, I'm feeling great already, but maybe I can feel even better. So I tried it and I didn't need it. It gave me symptoms where I was anxious and jittery and my resting heart rate went up. So, that was also a good lesson that, hey, not everyone needs it. But in my case, when I took it, I didn't feel better. So I went off of it. So sometimes we do a little bit of experimentation with people as well.
Yeah. And I always start really low and we kind of work our way up and we kind of find your dose. It's just one of those things. And I always tell people, listen, if I start you on some thyroid, your T3 is going to go up. And your TSH is going to suppress, which is not a big deal. Your TSH is going to kind of go down almost to zero. not a big deal, because if you feel good, why not? I thought it was interesting too. There was another study out there about psychiatrists, actually. They had people that were depressed coming into their office, and they did this big study about how they were just giving thyroid out to patients. They didn't check labs, they didn't do anything. They actually just started giving thyroid out to their patients, and patients were coming back feeling better. They didn't check their labs, they didn't check their levels.
They were
didn't.
coming off their depression medicine.
Yes.
Because they felt so much better, and it was just adjusting their thyroid.
So it's just interesting to me how we're so caught up in labs and optimal being within the range. And I just think sometimes some people feel better out of range. That's not a big deal. So anyway, when it comes to thyroid, because if you look at my thyroid, my T3 levels are now like in the 5s and 6, which would be considered hyperthyroidism. However, no, I don't have hyper. I have hypo. I'm treating myself to feel better. And so that's what we do with our patients, is we optimize them to feel good.
And another thing we'll do, if we start someone on a low dose of thyroid, we will tell them what to watch for as far as side effects. Like I mentioned with me, look for irritability. It's actually the exact opposite of feeling sluggish. If you get too hyperactive, that's too much thyroid.
Yeah, it's kind of more high rate, like your heart rate kind of goes up a little bit. You kind of feel a little anxious, you feel a little jittery. Those are the things I say my patients to look for. But typically when we start low and we kind of adjust, it doesn't happen. But we find the dose for them. So anyway, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, it's really about optimizing what's best for each individual. And that's what we base everything we do with hormones.
Yeah. So if you've been told, your labs are fine, but you just still feel off, you deserve to feel good. And sometimes the missing piece is thyroid.
I'd like to add one, I think, really important thing. And this is all about listening to your patients. A lot of times I will hear from patients, they will even tell you, I think I'm low on thyroid, but yet their numbers look fine. They also carry the symptoms. So they're going out there to their providers and they're not getting treated. When they tell me they have the symptoms, I listen and start at a low dose. Sometimes it's like the magic bullet that really gets people feeling.
Yeah. So thank you for listening today, and we appreciate y'all. And it's Matt and Amy with Look Good and Feel Good. Thank you.
Hang loose. Have a good day.